Awesome. Thanks for the reminder. I will definitely try to speak slow enough for comprehension.
All right, shall we get started?
Let's do it. Yeah,
Let's
thank
do
you.
this. Okay, welcome to the 76 of you that are on the call so far. Thank you so much for taking the time to come out to how white folks can play a role in anti-racist action in a time of COVID-19. It's a really intense time. A lot of people have a lot going on. You have a lot going on in your lives too. So I appreciate, I really appreciate your commitment to anti-racism, to put your time and resources into this when for so many of us, there's a lot going on in our own lives as well. My name is Chanel Gallant, and I am an organizer and a writer, and here in Toronto, which is a land that has been loved and shared by many Indigenous nations, and we're going to get into a little bit more of the land that we're on in a moment with Annie. But we just wanted to start out by welcoming you to this webinar, letting you know a little bit about who we are and why we're doing this. There are 5 of us organizing this. We're and we're going to introduce ourselves in a moment. Could I get the next slide? So we just wanted to start by grounding in kind of the larger purpose and the larger vision than this moment, because anti-racist struggle is centuries and centuries old, and white people have been a part of that struggle, though we have also been the primary, the primary creators and people who perpetuated white supremacy. There's also been white anti-racist resistance, and we want to ground ourselves in that as well. And so this quote is from Anne Braden, who was a white Southern woman from a wealthy family who was active in anti-racist struggle in the civil rights movement for decades, who said, "In every age, no matter how cruel the oppression carried on by those in power, there have been those who struggled for a different world. I believe this is the genius of mankind, the thing that makes us half divine, the fact that some human beings can envision a world that has never existed." And I have never lived in an anti-racist world. I have lived in a white supremacist and colonial world, but I am here because I believe so passionately in what could be and what actually we are not so far from, which leads really into the conversation about why white people. Could someone switch to the next slide? But first I'm going to pause and ask Annie if you could jump in with a bit about where we are.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much, Chanel. My name's Annie Banks. I live here on the Ohlone territories in what's known as Oakland, California. But I grew up on Lekwungen and Wasanich territories in colonially known as Victoria, British Columbia. This is Audrey. They're 9 months old and join me on all Zoom calls. And yeah, I'm so grateful that everyone has joined us. We wanted to start by talking about land acknowledgements. I'll start with a quote. So this quote is from Alison Jones from the website nativeland.ca. Just trying to minimize this. Oops. Swap. Territory acknowledgement is a way that people insert an awareness of Indigenous presence and land rights in everyday life. This is often done at the beginning of ceremonies, lectures, or any public event. It can be a subtle way to recognize the history of colonialism and a need for change in settler colonial societies. So we wanted to start with that because colonialism is such a core part of living in any of the nation states that most of us are calling in from. And so it's inherent to, we have to talk about it, we have to bring it up, but the challenging part about land acknowledgement, which Alison Jones goes on to talk about on nativeland.ca, is that it can turn into something that is not meaningful anymore, something that is just done almost in a way to cover up the colonialism that's ongoing, because colonialism isn't a past thing, it's ongoing. And as people who are living on Indigenous peoples' lands, and participating in a society that is still very, very, very colonial and violent towards Indigenous people, there's endless examples that, we don't necessarily have time to get into in this section, that, without talking about the current resistance and colonialism, by just saying, this is the territory of these people, but without talking about all of that, it can erase all of that. So it's certainly something that, I think for each person, they can figure out a way that they can do it in a way that's respectful. But one way here, that people have talked about, is trying to name the current resistance that's happening. So for me, I would name that here on the land of the Ohlone people, the Ohlone are actively organizing around sacred sites, the shell mound struggle. They are rematriating land, so they have a land trust, the first urban Indigenous woman-led land trust that they're running, and they are rematriating land, so taking back their own territories to live on and use. And they still are engaged in struggle around colonialism here. And then for people here who don't know whose land they're living on, because we all live on Indigenous land wherever we are, nativeland.ca is a great resource, because it is like a big map where you can look at the city or town that you live in, and find out whose territory that is. So we wanted to include that here. Slide.
Thanks, Annie. So we want to say a little bit more about why we're doing this. And great. Thanks for dropping that link to Native Land in the chat for folks who want to know more about the land that they are on. So a little bit about why we're doing this. So why talk about anti-racism and COVID-19? Some of these things you probably have started to read about. We're starting to see that we're getting more evidence that the impact of COVID-19 is really racialized, really intensely disproportionate impacts on people of color. In part, there's so many reasons for that. Because of all the social determinants of health, people of color are more likely to have the underlying conditions that make people more vulnerable. But they're less likely to have access to healthcare. And they're more likely to be the ones on the front lines doing essential service work. So we're seeing like really disproportionate impact. And Canada has not really been collecting race data, but we saw in the US, the fatality rates of COVID-19 are about twice as high for Black Americans as they are. I don't know if it's for white Americans or for all other Americans. And so white people help create those conditions that have created the vulnerability to COVID-19. And now we're seeing white people interfering with public health responses to COVID-19. So we're seeing white folks be like, well, we need to open up the economy, or we need to push, stricter policing, which is not actually supported by public health, as a way to reduce to deal with the crisis. And lastly, because white people actually have an interest, we have an interest in fighting for a fair anti-racist response to COVID that makes a society and an economy better for everyone. And I'm going to go into that a little bit later, but that's just sort of briefly why we think white people should be dealing with this. We think we see the response, or sorry, the impact on people of color is really differential, and white folks have a stake in that. Annie, did you want to say anything there?
That was great. Thanks, Chanel.
Great. Why don't we do a little bit on who we are? We're going to introduce ourselves just like with one line. I also just want to flag that this is a multiracial space. We're creating this as an opportunity for white folks to talk about taking anti-racist action, but actually this workshop, this webinar is open to everyone. And there are people of color and mixed race people on the call. So just something to think about as we talk about this space, like just to be conscious of not talking about it as a specifically white space, because it's not. So for me, as I said, my name is Chanel. I've already introduced myself, so I'm going to pass it on to Emma.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Emma. So as this says, I'm a community organizer that's based on Treaty 6 territory in Amiskwaciwâskahikan, also known as Edmonton, Alberta. And the most sort of, I guess, the yeah, I mostly organize in the climate justice movement. Yeah, and I'll pass it to, I guess, Johanna.
Hi, everybody. So just briefly, I'm a community organizer. I mostly organize with Showing Up for Racial Justice Toronto. I'm also an academic and a queer femme parent of 2 weird kids who are not currently on my lap. So that's helpful for the sound for all of you. Cheryl, do you want to go next?
Sure. So I'm also from Amiskwaci, Waskiki, in Edmonton, Alberta, and also a mom and degrowth proponent, supporting an organizer supporting racial justice, Indigenous migrant rights. Yeah, thanks for having me here.
Great.
Sorry, I think Annie, you're going to take on the agenda. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, I just before we do that, I actually forgot to say also that I organize with Showing Up for Racial Justice. I'm on the advisory board in the US, and I'm a member of the chapter in Toronto, and I have been an organizer in the sex workers' rights movement for almost 20 years.
Awesome. Thanks, Chanel. And I will add that I'm a member of the Wet'suwet'en Solidarity Front Bay Area and the Anti-Police Terror Project. So yeah, our agenda for today just changed, as we mentioned. I don't know if everyone heard that as they were coming in, but we've had so much interest and registrations, which is so exciting, that the idea of doing our original plan wasn't totally feasible. We originally were going to break out by region, but we had so many more registrations come in that we've changed up the agenda a little bit. So I'll walk you through it here. Right now we're doing the welcome and opening. Then we're going to talk more about the context. Chanel started that, and then we're going to just go a little deeper into what the context is. We're going to talk about why white people have a role to play. And then we're going to talk some about white organizing culture. Then we're going to talk about how to take action. And then at that point, we're going to break you into breakout groups. We have a great tech team who has been helping us a lot figure out how to do this. And Emma and Katie are going to make sure folks get into groups of 8. Is the plan? Yeah, groups of 8. Like I said, we originally were hoping to do this regionally, but at this point, we just have so many registrations from so many places that didn't necessarily make sense. To keep going that way. So they're going to be randomized groups where the hope is that people can, we're going to have questions that we'll share with you as you go into the breakout group. And then the hope is that folks can support each other and facilitate, a short conversation, 15 minutes. But we really, we're not experts. We're just doing this because we are organizers who, feel this is an important conversation to have, but not because we're, any kind of expert on this topic. Everyone's bringing their experience and knowledge to the space, and we really wanted to have space where people could connect with each other and hopefully make some connections ongoing, because we don't want to just do a one-time webinar, right? Like, we want to build some work together that hopefully leads to more and more awesome anti-racist organizing. That's the goal. So we're hoping that in these groups you'll have a chance to share what you're working on, what you've heard, your thoughts about the webinar, what it brought up for you, and then action steps. Do you want to stay in touch with someone? Do you want to, build on an idea together? And then we're also going to have ways that we can keep in touch after this so that we can plan subsequent connections, whether that be like another webinar or another way of keeping in touch. So that's what we got to there. And then our hope is to come back after that for a Q&A, so that if you have questions after the whole webinar and the breakouts, we can talk about that in a group. We'll have a chance for people both in the chat boxes and on the phone to ask questions. And then we'll wrap. And our plan is to end at our set time. So that's our 2 hours. Did I miss anything, anyone?
Okay, just a little bit of housekeeping around community guidelines. If you have questions, we're asking you to put them in the chat box, and we have a designated time for Q&A. If it's relevant to what we're talking about right then, we'll try to get to it right away. We're asking you to keep yourself muted. I think everyone is automatically muted for the first little while, but once we come off that, if you ask a question, just remember to remute yourself, or we'll hear every dog barking in your neighborhood. And in the breakout groups, to share the mic, and if you're someone who participates a lot, to give space for other folks. And if you often don't participate, then take this as an opportunity to go out on a limb and participate more. Annie, did you want to jump in?
Sorry, I was muted. No, that sounds great. Thanks, Chanel.
Yeah, and just be respectful with questions, obviously, and in the breakout groups. We can't really go into detail on what we think respect means, but we're asking folks to just, use your common sense around being thoughtful, and especially in spaces that are majority white, the culture can be quite critical. And so we want to ask people to focus, make an intention to focus on contribution and support. If you hear something somebody says that strikes you as really off, to think about how you can be a contribution to supporting that person through conversation versus approaching it from a place of criticism. That's it.